wonderful. I hope you're all doing well and staying safe. Welcome to another spelling and grammar lesson with Miss Forehand. Now I want you to get your pencils and your books out and write down the long date, Tuesday, 23rd of June 2020, and the LI to use a colon. Well done, everyone. Now before we get started, what do you know about colon? I'm sure you've heard about this word before, and I'm sure you've used it in your writing. So anything that you know, you can write it down. Excellent. Now let's move on. So before we get started, let's do our spelling test. I hope you've all revised your words. So get ready and off we go. The first word is possession. The ring was my mother's most precious possession. So if you were unsure as to what possession means, I hope you use a dictionary to look for the word and its definition. So possession means something that belongs to you. Second word, possible. You need to start your work as soon as possible. Third word, 8. I have 8 more tasks to complete. Now 8 is a homophone, and homophone are words that sound the same but have different spellings and different meanings, so don't get confused with the other 8. Fourth word, weight. This is also a homophone. They needed to gain a little weight before they would be released from hospital. Weight. And the last word, island. We live on an island. Now I'm going to give you a little clue here. One of the letters in this word is silent letter. Excellent. Now I'm going to go through the spelling list one more time, so make sure you've written everything down. Possession, possible, 8, weight, and island. Well done, everyone. Let's go through the spellings, and you can check that you have everything, what you've gotten correct. And if you didn't get some of the words right, that's fine. You can just write them down and write it down a few times for some practice. So you can pause this section right now whilst you're looking through the words. Well done, everyone. So did anyone beat their score from last week? You can write it down and take a picture and let me know. So these are the spellings to learn for next week. Dangerous, poisonous, perilous, joyous, and hazardous. Now you can use a dictionary to find the definition of these words. And what do you notice about these words? What do they have in common? They have the suffix OUS in common, which comes at the end of the words, so there is no change to the root word. So make sure you write these down and practice them for our spelling test next week. Well done, everyone. Okay, so what is a colon? This is how a colon is written down. It's a punctuation mark. And what can it be used for? It can be used before a list of words, phrases, or clauses. Let's take a look at this example sentence. Here are some things you will need: flour, 2 eggs, cheese, and fresh basil. Now let's dissect this sentence. We can see that the colon comes before the start of the list, so where the arrow is pointing towards. Items in the list are separated by commas, so where the arrow is pointing towards is the comma, and we have some other commas over here, one more. And is used before the last item in the list, so this does not need a comma. So you can pause this section and take a close look at the sentence. Colons for bullet points. A colon might also be used to introduce a series of bullet points. Let's read through the sentence. This is the recommended kit list for the camping trip: tent, camp stove, sleeping bag, food, dry clothes. So we have our colon over here, and these are our bullet points. So what did we have? We had lists and bullet points. Let's move on. A colon is not always needed to introduce a list. This means that when we are writing a list, we need to make a decision about whether it needs a colon or not. This is the key question to ask when you're deciding whether or not to use a colon. Does the phrase before my list make sense on its own? So if the phrase does make sense on its own, we can use a colon. So if it makes sense, we use a colon. And if it does not make sense, we should not use a colon. So I want you to tell this to an adult. Excellent. Let's look through some examples. The pot held pencils, rubbers, and elastic bands, and the pot contained the following: pencils, rubbers, and elastic bands. So from the sentence, which one of these makes sense? So which phrase makes sense on its own before the list? It's the second sentence, so that's why we added a colon, and then we said pencils, rubbers, and elastic bands. So the pot held by its own, it doesn't make sense. So on its own, it does not make sense. Okay, so now I want you to read through sentence A and sentence B. The drink contains milk, strawberries, and ice cream, and the drink contains the following: milk, strawberries, and ice cream. So you can read that out and see which one makes sense and which list needs a colon. So you can pause this section and do this now and write it down in your books. Well done. Let's go through the answer. Sentence B needs a colon because the phrase before the list makes sense on its own. So let's read. The drink contains the following, and then we'll put a colon over here. Let me draw it. And then it's milk, and then obviously we need a comma, strawberries, and then we have the and because we don't use a comma over here before the last word. So if for sentence A we would not add a colon after the drink contains, because that will not make sense by its own. So now you can do the same for these two sentences. So try it yourself, read it out, and tell me which list requires a colon. Excellent. So let's read it out together. The children can choose from a range of activities: tennis, orienteering, or swimming. Or the children can use whether to play tennis, go orienteering, or have a swim. Sentence A needs a colon because the phrase before the list makes sense on its own. So let's see where we would add the colon. The children can choose from a range of activities. That makes sense by its own. And then we add the colon, and then after the colon we have our list of activities. So over here they had a comma, orienteering or swimming. So you can either add and or depending on the sentence. Okay, so let's go through colons in more detail. A colon is used after a statement that introduces a quotation, an explanation, or an example. So I want you to get 3 fingers up and say quotation, explanation, and example, and you can tell this to an adult as well. Let's go through an example sentence. The role of the colon is simple, colon, to introduce. So which one do you think this is? Quotation, explanation, or example? This is explanation because it's explaining what the role of the colon is. Let's go through another example of explanation. You are left with only one option, colon, to keep going. So you are only left with one option is this statement, and it's introducing an explanation to keep going. So the one option is to keep going. The second sentence, Jim had this to say, colon, it was a tall man with a scar on his cheek. So this is introducing a quotation, and we know that when there's speech in a piece of writing, we use inverted commas, as you can see. Third one, the potion contains some exotic ingredients, colon, snail's eyes, bat's tongues, and garlic. So this is an example of an example, because after the colons we have the examples: snail's eyes, bat's tongues, and garlic. And in the previous slides, when we were going through the lists, they were also examples. Well done. Now I want you to pause this section and you can take a close look and you can write down some notes to help you remember this. Well done. Okay, so let's see which one is correct. The clause before the colon must make sense by itself, so this is what we've been going through. Now read both sentences. The potion contained snail's eyes, birds' tongues, and garlic, or the potion contained some exotic ingredients, snail's eyes, birds' tongues, and garlic. So read both sentences and see which clause makes sense on its own. Well done if this sentence was correct. Well done if you got it correct. So the potion contains some exotic ingredients, makes sense by its own. And then we have the colon, snail's eyes, bat's tongues, and garlic. So these are all examples. So this one would be incorrect because this potion contained, this doesn't make sense by itself. Okay, now I want you to read through these sentences and write down where the colon goes. So there is only one reason you failed, you didn't prepare. There are 4 parts to a plant: root, stem, leaves, and flower. The man had this to say on the topic, it was Dave. Now, as you can see me reading, you see that I haven't even paused. So when you're reading, see where a pause is required, and that's where the colon would go. So see, in order to make the sentence make sense. So first see where the statement is and whether it makes sense by itself, and then you can add the colon. Okay, let's go through the answers. There is only one reason you failed, colon, you didn't prepare. And there are 4 parts to a plant, colon, roots, stem, leaves, and flower. And the man had this to say on the topic, it was Dave. So identify the uses. Is it to explain, to quote, or to give examples? You can pause this section and write it down. So the first one is to explain, because it's explaining the reason why the person failed. It was because that they didn't prepare. And the second one is giving examples. And the examples were the root, stem, leaves, and flower, the examples to the 4 parts of the plant. And the third one is quote, because you can see the inverted commas over here. Well done if you got those correct. And if not, you can just pause this section and write down the correct answer and see where you went wrong. So for your task, this will be uploaded on the Year 4 online learning platform. You'll have this worksheet and you need to add a colon to the following examples. So these are all superhero related, and we just went through comic strips and Stan Lee, who introduced superheroes to older people. So I thought it would be nice to have this element in our lesson as well. So you can read out the sentence. For example, Iceman only had one weakness, fire. You have to see in the sentence where would you add the colon, and then when you've done that, you need to circle, is this explaining something? Is it a quote, or is it giving an example of something? So if you don't have a printer, that's absolutely fine. You can write all of this down. And over here, you have a small definition. The colon has the power to introduce a quotation, example, or explanation. So you can either just add a colon to the following sentences. And then if you want a challenge, you can explain what type of sentence it is and write down to explain, to quote, or to give examples, or if you're printing it out, to circle it. So that's your challenge. And once you're done, you can take a picture of your work and send it over to the Year 4 team at year4@grange.harrow.sch.uk. Well done everyone, and see you in our next lesson.